Chapter 71. It began one Monday with a very long shot. The assumption that Conchis had lived in London as a boy, and that there had indeed been an original Lily Montgomery in St. John's Wood. I went to Marylebone Central Library and asked to look at the street directories for 1912 to 1914. Of course, the name Conchis would not appear. I looked for Montgomery, Acacia Road, Prince Albert Road, Hants Ridge Place, Queens Grove. With an A to Z of London by my side, I worked through all the likely streets on the east of Wellington Road. Suddenly, with a shock of excitement, my eyes jumped to page Montgomery Fred K. 20 Allotson Road. The neighbors' names were given as Smith and Manningham, although by 1914 the latter had moved and the name Huckstep appeared. I wrote down the address and then went on searching. Almost at once, on the other side of the main artery, I came across another Montgomery, this time in Elm Tree Road. But I no sooner caught sight of it than I was disappointed, because the full name was given as Sir Charles Penn Montgomery, an eminent surgeon, by the look of the trail of initials after his name, and obviously not the man Conchis described. The neighbors' names there were Hamilton Dukes and Charlesworth. There was another title among the Elm Tree Road residents, a desirable address. I searched on, double-checking everything, but without finding any other Montgomery. I then followed up in later directories the two I had found. The Allotson Road Montgomery disappeared in 1922. Annoyingly, the Elm Tree Road Montgomery went on much longer, though Sir Charles must have died in 1922. After that, the owner's name appeared as Lady Florence Montgomery, and continued so right up to 1938. After lunch, I drove up to Allotson Road. As I swung into it, I knew it was no good. The houses were small terrace houses, nothing like the mansions Conchis had described. 5 minutes later, I was in Elm Tree Road. At least it looked more the part. A pretty circumflex of mixed, largish houses and early Victorian mews and cottages. It also looked encouragingly unaltered. Number 46 turned out to be one of the largest houses in the road. I parked my car and walked up a drive between banks of hydrangeas to an imposing front door, rang a bell. But it sounded in an empty house, and sounded so all through August. Whoever lived there was on holiday. I found out his name in that year's directory, a Mr. Simon Marks. I also found out from an old who's who that the illustrious Sir Charles Penn Montgomery had had 3 daughters. I could probably have found out their names, but I had by then become anxious to drag my investigations out. As a child, his last few sweets. It was almost a disappointment when, one day early in September, I saw a car parked in the driveway and knew that another faint hope was about to be extinguished. The bell was answered by an Italian in a white housecoat. "I wonder if I could speak to the owner, or his wife?" "You have appointments?" "No." "You sell something?" I was rescued by a sharp voice. "Who is it, Herr Cole?" She appeared a woman of 60, Jewish, expensively dressed, intelligent-looking. "Oh, I'm engaged on some research, and I'm trying to trace a family called Montgomery." "Sir Charles Penn, the surgeon?" "I believe he lived here." "Yes, he lived here." The houseboy waited, and she waved him away in a grande dame manner. Part of the wave came my way. "In fact, this is rather difficult to explain. I'm really looking for a Miss Lily Montgomery." "Yes, I know her." She was evidently not amused by the astounded smile that broke over my face. "You wish to see her?" I'm writing a monograph on a famous Greek writer, famous in Greece, that is, and I believe Miss Montgomery knew him well many years ago when he lived in England. What is his name? Maurice Conchis. She had clearly never heard of him. The lure of the search overcame a little of her distrust, and she said, I will find you the address. Come in. I waited in the splendid hall, that ostentation of marble and ormolu, beer glasses, what looked like a fragonard, petrified opulence, tense excitement. In a minute she reappeared with a card. On it I read, Miss Lily de Cetas, Dinsford House, Much Haddam, Hertz. I haven't seen her for several years, said the lady. Thank you very much. I began backing toward the door. Would you like tea? A drink? There was something glistening, obscurely rapacious, about her eyes, as if while she had been away she'd decided that there might be a pleasure to suck from me. A mantis woman, starved in her luxury, I was glad to escape. Before I drove off, I looked once more at the substantial houses on either side of number 46. In one of them, Conchis had perhaps spent his youth. Behind number 46 was what looked like a factory, though I had discovered from the A to Z that it was the back of the stands of Lord's cricket ground. The gardens were hidden because of the high walls, but the little orchard must now be dwarfed by the stands overhead. Very probably they had not been built before the First War. The next morning at 11, I was in Much Haddam. It was a very fine day, cloudless, September blue, a day to compare with a Greek day. Dinsford House lay some way out of the village, and although it was not quite so grand as it sounded, it was no hovel. A 5-bay period house, posed graciously and gracefully, brick red and white, in an acre or so of well-kept grounds. This time the door was opened by a Scandinavian au pair girl. Yes, Mrs. de Cetas was in. She was down at the stables, if I go round the side. I walked over the gravel, and under a brick arch there were 2 garages, and a little farther down I could see and smell stables. A small boy appeared from a door, holding a bucket. He saw me and called, Mummy, there's a man. A slim woman in jodhpurs, a red headscarf, and a red tartan shirt came out of the same door. She seemed to be in her early 40s, a still pretty, erect woman with an open-air complexion. Can I help you? I'm actually looking for Mrs. de Cetas. I am Mrs. de Cetas. I had it so fixed in my mind that she would be gray-haired, Conchis' age. Closer to her I could see crow's feet and a slight but telltale flabbiness around the neck. The rich brown hair was probably dyed. She might be nearer 50 than 40, but that made her still 10 years too young. Mrs. Lily de Cetas? Yes. I've got your address from Mrs. Simon Marks. A minute change in her expression told me that I had not recommended myself. I've come to ask you if you would help in a matter of literary research. Me? If you were once Miss Lily Montgomery. But my father. It's not about your father. A pony whinnied inside the stable. The little boy stared suspiciously at me. His mother urged him away, to go and fill his bucket. I put on all my Oxford charm. If it's terribly inconvenient, of course I'll come back another time. We're only mucking out. She leant the besom she was carrying against the wall. But who? I'm writing a study of Maurice Conchis. I watched her like a hawk, but I was over a bare field. Maurice who? Conchis. I spelt it. He's a famous Greek writer. He lived in this country when he was young. She brushed back a strand of hair, rather gauchely, with her gloved hand. She was, I could see, one of those country Englishwomen who are abysmally innocent about everything except horses, homes, and children. Honestly, I'm awfully sorry, but there must be some mistake. You may have known him under the name of Charlesworth or Hamilton Dukes a long time ago, the First World War. But, my dear man, I'm sorry. Not my dear man, oh dear. She broke off rather charmingly. I saw a lifetime of dropped bricks behind her, but her tanned skin and her clear bluish eyes, and the body that had conspicuously not run to seed, made her forgivable. She said, "What is your name?" I told her. Mr. Orff, do you know how old I was in 1914? Obviously very young indeed. She smiled, but as if compliments were rather continental and embarrassing. I was 10. She looked to where her son was filling the bucket. Benji's age. Those other names, they mean nothing? Good Lord, yes, but this Maurice, what did you call him? He stayed with them? I shook my head. Once again, Conchis had tricked me into a ridiculous situation. He had probably picked the name with a pin in an old directory. All he would have had to find was the name of one of the daughters. I plunged insecurely on. He was the son, an only son, very musical. I'm afraid there must be a mistake. The Charlesworths were childless, and there was a Hamilton Dukes boy, but I saw her hesitate as something snagged her memory. He died in the war. I think you've just remembered something else. No, yes, I don't know. It was when you said musical. She looked incredulous. You couldn't mean Mr. Rott. She laughed and put her thumbs in the pockets of her jodhpurs. The Wind in the Willows. He was an Italian who came and tried to teach us the piano, my sister and me. Young? She shrugged. Quite. Could you tell me more about him? She looked it down. Gambalino, Gambardello, something like that. Gambardello? She said the name as if it was still a joke. His first name? She couldn't possibly remember. Why Mr. Rott? Because he had such staring brown eyes. We used to tease him terribly. She pulled an ashamed face at her son, who had come back and now pushed her as if he was the one being teased. She missed the sudden leap of excitement in my own eyes, the certainty that Conchis had used more than a pin. Was he shortish, shorter than me? She clasped her headscarf, trying to remember, then looking up, puzzled. Do you know? But this can't be. Would you be very kind indeed and let me question you for 10 minutes or so? She hesitated. I was politely adamant. Just 10 minutes. She turned to her son. Benji, run and ask Gunhild to make us some coffee and bring it out in the garden. He looked at the stable. But lazy. We'll do for lazy in a minute. Benji ran up the gravel, and I followed Mrs. de Cetas as she peeled off her gloves, flicked off her headscarf, a willowy walk down beside a brick wall, and through a doorway into a fine old garden, a lake of autumn flowers. On the far side of the house, a lawn and a cedar. She led the way round to a sun loggia. There was a canopied swing seat, some elegant cast-iron seats painted white. I deduced that Sir Charles Penn Montgomery had had a golden scalpel. She sat in the swing seat and indicated a chair for me. I murmured something about the garden. It is rather jolly, isn't it? My husband does almost all this by himself, and now, poor man, he hardly ever sees it. She smiled. He's an economist, stuck in Strasbourg. She swung her feet up. She was a little too girlish, too aware of her good figure, reacting from a rural boredom. But, come on, tell me your famous writer I've never heard of. You've met him? He died in the occupation. Poor man. What of? Cancer. I hurried on. He was, very secretive about his past. Someone has to deduce things from his work. We know that he was Greek, but he may have pretended to be Italian. I jumped up and gave her a light for her cigarette. I can't believe it was Mr. Rott. He was such a funny little man. Can you remember one thing? His playing the harpsichord as well as the piano? The harpsichord is the plunkety-plunk one. I nodded, but she shook her head. You did say a writer? He turned from music to literature. You see, there are countless references in his early poems and in, well, a novel he wrote, to an unhappy but very significant love affair he had when he was still in England. Of course, we just don't know, or didn't, to what extent he was recalling reality and to what extent embroidering on it. But, am I mentioned? There are all sorts of clues that suggest the girl's name was a flower name, and that he lived near her, and that the common bond was music. She sat up, fascinated. How on earth did you trace this to us? Various clues from literary references. I knew it was very near Lord's cricket ground. In one passage, he talks of this girl with her ancient British family name. Oh, and her famous doctor father. Then I started looking at street directories. How absolutely extraordinary. It's just one of those things. You meet hundreds of dead ends, but one day you really hit a way through. Smiling, she glanced toward the house. Here's Gunhild. For 2 or 3 minutes we had to go through the business of getting coffee poured, polite exchanges about Norway. Gunhild had never been farther north than Trondheim, I discovered. Benji was ordered to disappear, and the Lily and I were left alone again. For effect, I produced a notebook. If I could just ask you a few questions. I say, glory at last. She laughed rather stupidly, hoarsely. She was enjoying herself. I believed he lived next to you. He didn't. Where did he live? Oh, I haven't the faintest idea. You know, at that age. You knew nothing about his parents? She shook her head. Would your sisters perhaps know more? Her face gravened. My eldest sister lives in Chile. She was 10 years older than me, and my sister Rose. Rose? She smiled. Rose. God, this is extraordinary. It clinches it. There's a sort of mystery poem that belongs to the group about you. It's very obscure, but now we know you have a sister. Had a sister. Rose died just about that time, in 1916. Of typhoid? I said it so eagerly that she was taken aback, then smiled. No, of some terribly rare complication following jaundice. She stared out over the garden for a moment. It was the great tragedy of my childhood. Did you feel that he had any special affection for you or for your sisters? She smiled again, remembering. We always thought he secretly admired May, my eldest sister. She was engaged, of course, but she used to come and sit with us, and yes, oh goodness, it's strange. It does come back. I remember he always used to show off, what we called showing off, if she was in the room. Play frightfully difficult bits, and she was fond of that Beethoven thing, For Elise. We used to hum it when we wanted to annoy him. Your sister Rose was older than you? 2 years older. So the picture is really of 2 little girls teasing a foreign music teacher. She began to swing on the seat. Do you know, it's frightful, but I can't remember. I mean, yes, we teased him. I'm jolly sure we were perfect little pests. But when the war started and he disappeared. Where? Oh, I couldn't tell you. No idea. But I remember we had a dreadful old battle axe in his place, and we hated her. I'm sure we missed him. I suppose we were frightful little snobs, one was in those days. How long did he teach you? 2 years? She was almost asking me. Can you remember any sign at all of strong personal liking for you on his side? She thought for a long moment, then shook her head. You don't mean something nasty? No, no. But were you, say, ever alone with him? She put on an expression of mock shock. Never. There was always our governess, or my sister, my mother. You couldn't describe his character at all? I'm sure if I could meet him now, I'd think a sweet little man, you know? You or your sister never played the flute or the recorder? Goodness, no. She grinned at the absurdity. A very personal question. Would you say you were a strikingly pretty little girl? I'm sure you were, but were you conscious that there was something rather special about you? She looked down at her cigarette. In the interests, oh dear, how shall I say it? In the interests of your research and speaking as a poor, rattled mother, the answer is yes, I believe there was. Actually, I was painted. It became quite famous. All the rage of the 1913 Academy. It's in the house. I'll show you in a minute. I consulted my notebook. And you just really can't remember what happened to him when the war came? She pressed her fine hands against her eyes. Heavens, doesn't this make you realize? I think he was interned, but honestly, for the life of me, Would your sister in Chile remember better? Might I write to her? Of course. Would you like her address? She gave it to me, and I wrote it down. Benji came and stood about 20 yards away, by an astrolabe on a stone column, looking plainer than words that his patience was exhausted. She beckoned to him, caressed back his forelock. Your poor old mum's just had a shock, darling. She's discovered she's a muse. She turned to me. Is that the word? What's a muse? A lady who makes a gentleman write poems? Does he write poems? She laughed and turned back to me. And he's really quite famous? I think he will be one day. Can I read him? He's not been translated, but he will be. By you? Well, I let her think I had hopes. She said, I honestly don't think I can tell you any more. Benji whispered something. She laughed and stood up in the sunlight and took his hand. We're just going to show Mr. Orff a picture. Then it's back to work. It's Orff, actually. She put her hand to her face in shame. Oh dear, there I go again. The boy jerked her other hand. He too was ashamed of her silliness. We all walked up to the house, through a drawing room into a wide hall, and then into a room at the side. I saw a long dining table, silver candlesticks. On the paneling between two windows was a painting. Benji ran and switched on a picture light above it. It showed a little Alice-like girl with long hair in a sailor dress, looking round a door as if she was hiding, and could see whoever was looking for her, searching in vain. Her face was very alive, tense, excited, yet still innocent. In gilt, on a small black plaque beneath, I read, Mischief by Sir William Blunt, R.A. Charming. Benji made his mother bend down and whispered something. He wants to tell you what the family calls it. She nodded at him, and he shouted, How soppy can you get? She pulled his hair as he grinned. Another charming picture. She apologized for not being able to invite me to lunch, but she had a women's institute due in Hertford, and I promised that as soon as a translation of the Conchi's poems was ready, I would send a copy. Listening to her, I realized I was still the old man's victim. Until then, still half believed that last version of his rich, cosmopolitan past he had foisted on me, and then confirmed through June. Now I remembered the repeated echo in his stories of some vital change of life or fortune in the 1920s. I began to erect a new hypothesis. He would have been the gifted son of some poor Greek immigrant family, perhaps from Corfu or the Ionian Islands, ashamed of his Greek name, taking an Italian one, trying to rise in the alien Edwardian world of London, to shake off his past and background, already living a kind of double life. All of us who had been through the system at Barani must have been scapegoats for all the humiliations and unhappiness he had suffered in the Montgomery household, and no doubt others like it, during those distant years. I smiled as I drove, half at the thought of this very human rancor lying behind the intellectual theorizing, half at the prospect of this promising new lead to follow. I came out into the main street of Much Haddam. It was 12:30, and I decided to get a bite to eat before I did the drive back to London. I stopped at a small, half-timbered pub. I had the lounge bar all to myself. "Passing through?" asked the landlord as he drew a pint. "No, been to see someone. Dinsford House. Nice place she's got there. You know them?" He wore a bow tie, had a queasy in-between accent. "Know of them. I'll take the sandwiches separate." He rang up the till. "Used to see the children round the village. I've just been out there on business." "Ah, yes." A peroxided woman's head appeared round the door. She held out a plate of sandwiches. As he handed me back my change, he said, "Singer in opera, wasn't she?" "I don't think so." "That's what they say round here." I waited for him to go on, but he evidently wasn't very interested. I finished half a sandwich, thought. "What's her husband do?" "Isn't a husband." He caught my quick look. "Well, we've been here 2 years now, and I never heard of one. They're gentlemen friends, I'm told." He gave me a minute wink. "Ah, I see. Of course they're, like me, London people." There was a silence. He picked up a glass. "Good-looking woman. Never seen her daughters?" I shook my head. He polished the glass. "Real corkers." Silence. "How old are they?" "Don't ask me. I can't tell 20 from 30 these days. The eldest are twins, you know." If he hadn't been so busy polishing the glass in the old buy-me-a-drink ploy, he would have seen my face freeze into stone. "What they call identicals. Some are normals, and others are identicals." He held the glass up high to the light. "They say the only way their own mother can tell them apart, one's got a scar or something on her." I was out of the bar so fast that he didn't even have time to shout.